Armament is an American company based in New Mexico, and they have specialized in their own style of carbine buffer they call the L.A.R.B. We have a review of that on our channel. If you haven't seen that and are curious, you can look that up on our YouTube channel. What we're going to talk about today is a new buffer they've designed. This buffer is designed for the VLTOR A5 system. The A5 system, if you're not familiar with that, is a buffer tube that is about 5/8 inch longer than the standard carbine buffer tube. It's designed to use a standard rifle recoil spring as opposed to the standard carbine recoil spring. And the buffer itself is slightly longer than the standard carbine buffer design. So now Armament has developed their answer to the A5 buffer. They call it their Mod 3. So what we're going to do in today's video is compare the Armament L.A.R.B A5 buffer to the standard VLTOR A5 buffer. We're going to compare materials, design, and we're going to take these out in the field and compare function. I want to compare the materials, design, and structure differences between these two buffers. This is the VLTOR A5. VLTOR has these in 5 different weights. They are called the VLTOR A5 H0 through A5 H4, and they weigh from 3.8 ounces to 6.83 ounces. The one we're going to use for our initial comparison is the VLTOR A5 H2. And this weighs 5.3 ounces. I'm picking this because it's the closest factory weight to the L.A.R.B. This weighs exactly 5.0 ounces. So this buffer is almost 1/3 of an ounce lighter than our comparison buffer. But we'll start there, see how that goes, and then we'll see what kind of results we get. The prices of the VLTOR buffers range from about $35 for their lightest buffer to about $60 for their heaviest buffer. Their designation of 0, H1, H2, H3, and H4 has to do with how many tungsten weights are in the buffer. This buffer is a little bit longer than the standard carbine buffer, and rather than 3 weights, there's actually 4 weights of the same dimension that you find in a standard carbine buffer. So the heaviest buffer will have 4 tungsten weights, and the lightest buffer just has 4 steel weights. The L.A.R.B has 1 stainless steel weight. So if we look internally, we did take these apart so we could show you how the internals are arranged. And so if we look at the VLTOR, you see that there are 4 weights. This particular buffer that we're going to use in our test, we're going to start out with the 2 steel weights and the 2 tungsten weights. They're the little standard rubber bumper pads between the metal surfaces. And you can see that with the VLTOR design, the last weight in the rear of the buffer internally has a small spring. And the idea with this is that that small spring puts a little forward pressure on the weight stacks, and that when the bolt is in battery, that spring will push the weights forward and make sure that all of the weight is forward so that you'll have a delayed unlocking effect as opposed to the weights being toward the rear. If we look at the internals of the L.A.R.B, the internal weight is a single solid stainless steel weight. You can see that it has a much heavier spring system. The spring is placed in the forward position, so the weight is held to the rear of the buffer. If we look at the external construction, the L.A.R.B is 100% stainless steel. It's very nicely machined. The body of the VLTOR buffer is made out of 7075 aluminum and is anodized. If you look at the front of the buffers, you see that the VLTOR is flat. The L.A.R.B adds this convex shape that is designed to fit just inside the standard mil-spec bolt carrier group and help in alignment of the buffer system. We saw this with their standard carbine buffer as well. Another difference is if we look at the rear, the body is thinner with the L.A.R.B, but then you have the widening at the rear to help with alignment. This is designed to fit just inside the spring. So there again you have the linear alignment. The bumper on the rear of the buffer is different. You can see how we have a cone shape and it's a different material as well. So what I want to do is just go ahead and take these two buffers out to Bullet Creek. And let's look at bolt velocity differences. What we saw was despite a 7% increase in weight, there was only a 2% decrease in bolt velocity, which is what we would expect given the relationship between velocity and mass as it relates to kinetic energy. The weight difference is more than I would like, and so I'm going to go ahead and let's change that and try to get the weight of these two buffers closer. Another thing I need to mention is when I took these two buffers out in the field initially, I used a lower that was set up to run my Strike belt-fed upper. And the Strike uses a heavier spring as well as a small wafer in the back of the buffer tube that's about 1/16 of an inch thick. And so that will shorten the stroke length of a cycle. That will increase the rate of cycling, but both of these buffers were tested with the same platform. So what we saw was about what we would expect. The heavier buffer ran very slightly slower than the lighter buffer. Let's get the weights closer. Let's also eliminate the wafer in the back of the buffer tube, and we'll use the standard rifle spring and not the extra power spring. What I'm going to do is substitute one of the steel weights in the VLTOR buffer with an aluminum weight from my KAK Industry adjustable buffer kit. If you're not familiar with that, I do have a review of that product. It's a very neat product for those who like to experiment and custom tune their buffers and their rifles. You can find that on my YouTube channel. So after substituting one steel weight with an aluminum weight, we've got the VLTOR buffer down to 4.90 ounces compared to the 5.0 ounces that we see with the L.A.R.B. So we're within 1/10 of an ounce, much closer in weight. We also have the changes in the spring and the stroke length. So let's go back out in the field now and look and see what kind of results we get with these buffers. The other thing that I want to do is, if you notice in the VLTOR system, the spring is in the rear of the buffer pushing the weights forward. But in the Armament system, the spring is in the front pushing the weights rearward. So when we go out in the field this next time, what I like to do, just out of curiosity, after we test the L.A.R.B in its standard configuration, I'm going to reverse the order of the spring and the weight internally in the buffer and see, number one, if it'll work at all, and does it change the rate of fire at all, the bolt velocity. So let's see what we find. The bolt velocity appears to be almost exactly the same when the weights are within 1/10 of an ounce. Interestingly, a surprise, when I switched the position of the spring and the weight in the L.A.R.B, we saw a reduced rate of fire of 39 rounds per minute. That's a very significant slowing down of the cycling when you reversed the position. Now, I'm going to have to talk to Nick Berry at Armament. I'm not exactly sure why they chose the position that they did for their spring and their weight internally. And I don't know if there's a wear and tear issue that might occur. But right now it seems like that this buffer functions better as far as slowing down the bolt unlocking and the bolt velocity and cycling rate if you reverse the typical position of the spring and the weight. One other comment I'd like to make before we wrap this up is let's take a close look at these buffer bodies. The L.A.R.B buffer is going to run over $100, and you can find a comparable weighted buffer for about half that. So, what are the advantages and why would you choose one over the other? Well, obviously the construction is very different. This is stainless steel. And the thing that I'd like to point out is, look at the face of this VLTOR. It is just about worn where you can't hardly read the writing. This is 7075 aluminum, which is a very strong alloy, but you can see that there's been some wear in the face. And I suspect, since this is a stainless steel body and it is interacting with a steel bolt carrier group, that this might actually fare a little bit better over the long haul. So it is a stronger body, and if you reverse the position of the spring and the buffer, it actually yields a slower rate than a comparable weighted VLTOR design. In its standard factory configuration, you're going to get the same effect as far as slowing down the rate of fire, which also means slowing down the bolt velocity, which also translates into a softer felt recoil. So it functions about the same as the factory. It is made with a stronger material, costs twice as much, and if you reverse the position of the spring and buffer, it actually functions a little bit better than the standard factory VLTOR. Well guys, I hope you found the information interesting and useful. It was a little bit of a surprise when we switched around the position of that spring and buffer. If you have any questions or comments, please post those and I try to respond to those in a timely fashion. If you like what you're seeing, please consider going to my Patreon page and becoming a patron to support the expenses that I incur while I make these videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.